Hello and welcome to the first of the Food Glorious Food Town Hall talks on the topic of protein for active aging, funded through the City of Unley. My name is Joy Gibson. I'm a dietitian here in Adelaide, and I'm delighted to talk to you today to explain a little bit more on protein in the context of healthy aging. The World Health Organization defines healthy aging as the process of developing and maintaining functional ability that enables our well-being in older age. This is really about having the capabilities that enable all of us to be and do what you have reason to value most. This includes your ability to meet your basic needs, to learn, grow, make your own decisions, to be mobile, build and maintain relationships, and to contribute to society. As our Adelaide cartoonist Simon Kneebone suggests, it's basically about doing what you want, when you want, for as long as you want. There is just so much information out there on food and dieting. If I Google the word diet, I get 1,340,000,000 hits. So if we come to some of our local resources and our libraries in South Australia and focus on healthy eating, we only have over 900 results to wade through. So I really do compliment the City of Unley for actually bringing us together to talk through this really important topic. What I really like is the simplicity in this. Eating well is about being able to eat anything in moderation. It's not about labeling foods as bad or off limits, and it's really about enjoying food and understanding it in a way that allows you to make good choices. So what is a protein? Well, again, back to Dr. Google. Once I enter protein, I only get 680 million results. And the images that come straight up are all protein powders or supplements, all with very nice price tags. But essentially, protein is in every living thing. They're made from chains of individual amino acids. Those are things like leucine or arginine, which you'll see advertised on products now and again, generally trying to sell you something, which is just a breakdown of a protein. Protein contains nitrogen, unlike carbohydrates or fats, and as our gardeners know, nitrogen is needed for everything to grow. So what does protein do in our body? Well, really, as I said before, it's in every living cell, and it makes up the majority, or is involved in the majority of functions of our bodies. From antibodies, which are very topical right now, as you'll all know, enzymes. For example, amylase is an enzyme that's in your saliva, in your mouth, and that actually breaks down starches and sugars long before they even get to your stomach. Proteins form part of messengers, like hormones, for example, insulin. And we all know how important insulin is in regulating the uptake of glucose from our blood. Structural component, essentially the main depot for protein in our bodies, is in our muscles. For a typical adult male, about 70 kilograms, protein makes up about 12 kilograms. Half of that is in our muscles, and about the other 15% is in the blood and the skin. In transport and storage, speaking of blood, protein actually forms hemoglobin, and that's what's used to carry oxygen around our bodies and to every living cell that we have. I mentioned antibodies, and I guess it's one of those topical issues right now. And, after an infection, including a viral infection, and dare I mention the coronavirus, our immune system produces antibodies. And these are proteins that are critical for fighting and clearing out the virus. Right now, there's a lot of talk about coronavirus antibody tests. They can be used to show how much of a population was exposed to the virus, SARS-CoV-2. And actually, more research is underway right now. It's a frantic research area to understand how much protection our antibodies have against having a reinfection from the virus. So a few more fun facts about protein. It's absolutely essential for normal growth and health. There's only about 20 amino acids, which, as I mentioned, are those building blocks from protein. And 9 of those are considered essential because they cannot be made in the human body, and the only way we can get them is in through our diet. Protein that we eat needs to be digestible so that we can actually break it down and use it as protein. There is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. Love a good acronym and a name nobody is going to remember. But this is actually what measures the protein quality in foods. The highest possible score is 1, and that generally says to us that the quality of that protein will meet the requirements and have all of those 20 amino acids. So dairy products, animal products are generally all have that score of 1. Soy protein, quinoa are also with the score of 1 as well. So there is a role for some plant-based proteins as well in our diet. Some other factors that affect our nutritional well-being is a phenomenon called the anorexia of aging. So it's a natural process, and what we would notice is that we may not feel like eating the same quantity of food that we did when we were younger. So while we might need a few less calories, we actually need to make sure that the quality of the food that we eat, especially the protein component, is actually better. We may feel full quicker. Sometimes we may lose interest in cooking, especially if we're cooking for one. It can be hard sometimes to do a 4-course gastronomic delight that we might see in MasterChef. Sometimes we might have medications and they may affect your appetite or cause some gastrointestinal side effects. Right now, we're eating out less often, and that can reduce our social ability to go out and catch up with friends, get down to the club, have a Friday lunch, and that. So that can all affect how well we're eating and drinking. There are some physiological changes associated with aging. As I mentioned, second only to water, our body is composed mostly of protein. Our muscle mass and strength actually start to decline as early as the age of 40. Researchers estimate that the speed of muscle mass loss is about 1 to 2% per year after the age of 50. We also experience a decline in our strength of about 1.5% per year, beginning at that age of 50 and accelerating to about 3% per year after the age of 60. And the rate at which we actually make muscle also declines the older we get. This figure is actually the MRI results through the mid-thigh of a 25-year-old healthy adult on the left and a 75-year-old healthy adult on the right. And what that shows is the difference in muscle mass, which is the light grey area. We can see the bone in the center and then a larger light grey area, which in the young active person takes up most of the room. But for the older adult, we've actually lost a good component of that muscle mass in comparison. And even though the leg shape itself might not have changed, what we have is a larger area of subcutaneous fat instead of muscle. We call this sarcopenia, which is that natural aging process and that decrease in muscle as we age. So really, prevention is better than cure. We can do something to slow that change and slow that decrease in muscle mass. One study followed over 2,000 elderly people over 3 years, and it found that those who ate the most protein daily lost 40% less muscle mass than people who ate the least. And a review of clinical studies in elderly people found that eating more protein or taking protein supplements can or may slow that rate of muscle loss, increase the muscle mass, and help build more muscle. And combining that protein-rich diet with resistance-based exercise, this seems to be the most effective way to fight sarcopenia. So how much protein do we need? Technically speaking, if we look at our Australian recommended daily intakes for protein, we can see that for men in the age group of 51 to 70-year-olds, we need about 64 grams per day, which is about 0.84 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then once we go over 70, that jumps to 81 grams per day, or an increase to 1.07 grams per kilogram. The same jump applies with women. So if you're aged 51 to 70 years old, then it's about 46 grams a day or 0.75 grams per kilo. But again, once we go over 70, that jumps so to 57 grams a day or 0.94 grams per kilogram. I don't expect anybody to remember these reference numbers or anything like that. But the point is, the older you get, you actually need more protein. And this can also be at a time when you're experiencing less appetite. So this is the fine balance that we have and that I often discuss with people as a dietitian. Sometimes our requirements may differ and we may even have higher protein needs, especially if you have some comorbidities. Some people I work with who might have some wounds that aren't healing well, and that might increase their protein intake requirements to 2 grams per kilo per day, which would almost be double what you would normally expect. So how do we translate these figures and numbers and grams per kilogram into food? Well, the Australian Guide for Healthy Eating has some specific information for healthy eating when you're older. And you can find this information on the eatforhealth.gov.au and Healthy Eating When You're Older section. But really the principal guideline is to achieve and maintain a healthy weight, be physically active, and choose amounts of nutritious food and drinks to meet your energy needs. And older people should eat nutritious foods and keep physically active to help maintain muscle strength and a healthy weight. This is a diagram of the types of foods that we should have in our repertoire between the pantry and our fridge and all of that, okay? But essentially, they've helped us organize our plate, as it were, into grains and cereal foods, vegetables and legumes and beans, fruit, the dairy or alternatives, the milk, yogurt, cheese are their alternatives, and the lean meats and poultry, fish, eggs, tofu, nuts and seeds, and legumes and beans. So please don't hate me for putting a number of serves in front of you like this, but this is essentially the information that's available on the Eat for Health website. And the interesting things that I'd like to just talk about is that if you notice, for women between 51 and over, we have almost double the requirements for men from the milk, yogurt, cheese, and dairy or alternatives groups. And yes, you're right, that has to do with that risk of osteoporosis as we get older and the provision of calcium in the diet. Notwithstanding, for men, the number of serves does increase once we get over 70, and men are at risk of osteoporosis as well. Another point to note is that the lean meat and poultry, fish, eggs, nuts, seeds and legumes and beans is only around 2 serves or 2.5 serves for men. Okay, so it's not excessive. We still want to have our 5 serves of vegetables and legumes and beans. And our fruit is only 2 serves. And our grains and cereal foods, which can also provide protein in the diet, they are also a lot of the energy foods that we take in. And you can see that over 70, they're the only ones that would actually decrease marginally in the number of serves that we would eat in a day. So when we're looking at the protein-rich foods in our diet, I guess we just want to know, what does a serve of these look like? So again, women are expected or recommended to have about 2 serves from this food group a day, and men 2.5 serves. So really, that standard serve would be about 65 grams of cooked meat, which would generally be about the size of the palm of your hand, excluding the fingers and the thumb. It's about 80 grams of cooked chicken, or that small tin of fish, tuna, salmon, etc. A serve of eggs is actually 2 eggs, or a cup of baked beans. For the tofu lovers, it's about 170 grams of tofu. And for those who just want a quick snack on the go, it's about 30 grams of nuts, seeds, peanut or almond butter, or other nut or seed spreads. So again, these are the high protein foods. So we know that the animal proteins, fish, dairy, meat and eggs, and also the plant-based proteins, which are primarily soy, the tofu or tempeh, nuts and seeds, beans, peas, lentils and legumes are all rich sources of protein as well. There is an increasing interest in plant-based diets without a doubt, but since protein is essential to all living things, plant foods also have proteins. About half a cup of legumes will give you about 10 grams of protein and a nice amount of fibre as well. And some plant foods, for example the quinoa and soy, can provide the essential amino acids. Your whole grains will give you 6 to 12 grams of protein per serve, and even a cup of whole wheat pasta will give you about 7 grams of protein. Meat substitutes that are on the market now, like the mycoproteins, for example, corn, they can provide similar tastes and textures to meat and plant-based meals and are a rich source of. So we know we get about 16% of our protein intake from dairy or alternatives products. So this is the group that I mentioned earlier, where women have 4 serves a day and men will have 2.5 serves if you're younger than 70, or increasing to 3.5 serves if you're over 70 years of age. So what is that standard serve? Typically, it's a cup of milk or a milk alternative such as the soy milk, half a cup of evaporated milk, or 2 slices of hard cheese. If you're going for the soft cheese, it's about half a cup. And if you're having a tub of yogurt, that's another serve of dairy. I think it's worth noting that when we come to talk about superfoods, there is actually only one superfood, and that's breast milk. That's the only food that can provide all of the nutrition requirements of an infant. Everything else can be super, but it's not a superfood. And I think there's a big difference between the protein content of milks or those milky type plant-based drinks. So your average glass of milk will give you about 8 grams of protein. Almond milk will only be 1 gram of proteins. Coconut milk has no protein whatsoever. So your cow milk, dairy milk, or your soy milk or pea milk, which we don't really see too often here, are generally those kind of richer sources of protein. A serve of grain or cereal foods would be 1 slice of bread, half a medium or roll or flat bread, that kind of cooked porridge, wheat, crispets or crumpets. Those again are our energy foods, but they do provide some protein foods. About a quarter of our daily protein comes from cereal or cereal-based products. So when I'm out and about as a dietitian and I'm in somebody's home, I might see a kind of eating pattern that might suggest to me that there isn't enough protein on a daily basis. Some typical things I look out for might be where breakfast might be just 2 slices of toast and a cup of tea. Meals on wheels are getting delivered, and somebody might eat the hot meal at lunchtime but save the soup and dessert for the evening and not have very much in between those meal times. Meals on wheels are very specific. The meals that they provide are estimated to provide about 1/3 of a person's daily requirements. So when you're splitting those meals, you're not going to be able to make up the protein for your day if you're sharing that meal across 2 meal times. It's important to try and spread that protein out throughout the day. And really we're aiming for about 25 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch and dinner, or morning, afternoon and evening time. In my experience, breakfast and lunch are sometimes lower in protein, but the main meal, which would be the typical fare of meat and veggies, they're usually fine. So you can use strategies like making meals higher in protein by enriching that meal with protein or including protein-rich foods on the side, and or include protein-rich snacks mid-meals, so in between first meal and second meal. There's loads of resources out there. BBC, great place to look for recipes. You're all online. If you're watching this, there's no reason in the world you couldn't dip into the 26 high protein breakfast recipes. They've got some great ideas like the dippy eggs with Vegemite soldiers, adding toast and having baked beans with it, adding a milk coffee with your breakfast, making your porridge a high protein one. They'll even do the smoothies or whatever. So there's lots of great information and ideas out there. For lunch, for some of you who have kind of that lighter lunch and your main meal in the evening, just make sure there's some kind of protein there when you're having that sandwich. Okay? And then if you're having a soup, make sure it's based on meat or vegetables or legumes, and then enrich it by adding milk powder. The idea is silken tofu, split peas, lentils, barley, etc. If you're looking for a canned soup, some of them now have higher protein soups, and they'll be called chunky soups and things like that. Or you can use your powdered soup as a base and enrich it later. This is an example of a packet of soup I had in my own press at home. You can see even through the ingredients that chicken powder is actually, is it 7th on the list of the ingredients? And really the protein quality or the protein provided in a cup of that soup once it's made up is about 6 grams, which really isn't very high at all. So what you could do with something like that is either add some barbecue chicken pieces to the soup when you've made it up, or some tinned canned beans, black beans, kidney beans, whatever you like, or add some milk powder to it, because that's another great source of protein and it's relatively cheap as well. Or if you're not going to change that soup, then complement it with something on the side. So instead of just having soup and plain toast, maybe have a toasty with ham and cheese or something like that instead. Have a full milk coffee after it then, or have a yogurt and fruit as dessert. So either add something to the soup or add something on the side. Okay, so using these kind of strategies and what we've learned a little bit more about the kinds of foods that are protein rich, that are available to us and recommended for us, small adjustments to that, case that I mentioned earlier would be like with the breakfast, the 2 slices of toast and the cup of black tea, well, add beans or eggs. Or if you don't want something at that time, at least have a morning tea with a handful of nuts or some fruit and yogurt afterwards, and that will bring the protein content of that up. And then with Meals on Wheels, there is a high protein meal option there, so they will add extra protein to that meal if you request them to do so. Then have the soup and dessert in the evening. You can add some milk powder to the soup and complement that soup and dessert with something with a bit more protein in it, a bit more of a salad or a toasty, or a sandwich with some protein in it, or hummus on the side, or some falafels, or lentil burgers, however you want to do it. So really, coming back to that enjoyment, that's the most important part of anything when we eat and drink. Enjoy every meal. Keep it social. I know it's difficult right now, but maybe call a friend when you're having lunch in your respective houses. Make sure and have a protein-rich food at each mealtime, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And if you're feeling that your appetite is, less than it used to be, or you're filling up fast, then eat that protein component off your plate first. Top up with protein-rich snacks mid-meals, and especially around supper time to break that long fasting overnight. Find a way to include resistance-based exercise to your daily routine. And most important of all, just keep smiling. My dad used to say, and he used to quote, I believe Chili Davis, that growing old is mandatory, but growing up is optional. So I guess we're all still very much young at heart. And this is just a little tribute to my mum, who is the lady sitting on the left with the red skirt. And she's teaching 15 and 16-year-olds knitting. And as she would say herself, you're never too young or you're never too old to learn a new trick. Thank you so much for taking part in this Food Glories food event. I hope you found something of interest in that talk. My name is Joy Gibson, and I'm at nutrition@outlook.com. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the first of the Food Glorious Food Town Hall talks on the topic of protein for active aging, funded through the City of Unley.